further ado, we're going to kick things off and start with Nancy Gideon, who is going to start things off with our population forecast, or our population estimates. Sorry. Take it away, Nancy. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Elizabeth. I am so pleased to be here on the 40th anniversary, the 40th State Demography Summit. And today, my job is to tell you about what happened between July of 2020 and July of 2021. That is the population estimates. We're not looking forward, not forecasts yet. That will be in a presentation, 2 presentations from now. But we're going to look back at this past, not even this past year, but this 20 to 21. What happened? Keep in mind, it was still sort of right in the middle of the pandemic. So one thing to note, there will be a question and answer period later this morning. And so if you have any questions that come up, please hold them until that time. So population estimates. These are the slides we put together every year because we're talking about our methods. We provide total population, and we divide that into household population and group quarters. In addition, we keep track of housing units by occupied and vacant, and then can calculate a persons per household. And I need to share my screen, don't I? There's always something. There. Is my screen shared now? I apologize for that. All the things we're working on. Okay. We do the population estimates and we do them for multiple geographies, counties, municipalities, the unincorporated areas, and Conservation Trust Fund special districts. All told, that is 522 different entities. So population estimates are based off of a decennial census. That is our primary foundation. And the 2020 census data was released last year, and now that is our foundation. Each year, we add the number of births, subtract deaths, add the people who move in, and subtract those who move out to come up with the new population. And we will do that every year between 2020 and 2030. Keep in mind, though, each year we revise back to the decennial year. So we put together 2021 estimates this year, but we also revised our July 2020 estimates. So a note on sources as well. The data on births and deaths come from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Data on migration, those people moving in minus those moving out, most of it comes from the Census Bureau. And they are gathering data on that from IRS tax returns and Medicare enrollments. We also track changes in group quarters. So those are the fundamentals of how the population is calculated at the county level. So Colorado is not in a bubble. Colorado is part of the United States. So what happened in the rest of the United States during this time period? Well, like I said, this was a pandemic time period. Can you remember what was going on in July of 2020? Well, growth overall has been slowing. In fact, the United States saw its slowest annual growth rate of 0.1%. During this time, 17 states actually lost population. And on the map on the right of your screen, those states shaded in orange tones lost population. You'll see California, Illinois, and New York are some of the biggest. Those states shaded in purple gained population. And you'll note, even those shaded in gray, like Colorado, gained a little bit of population, less than 0.5%. So Colorado was that 0.5%, gaining about 30,000 people. That ranked us 17th in terms of our percentage growth and 11th in absolute numbers. So when we put together our population estimates, they're slightly different than the Census Bureau's. We came up with 5,814,707 people. That was an increase of 30,551, or a 0.53% increase between July 1st, 2020 and July 1st, 2021. As I mentioned, we revise back the data every year because each year we get improved data. And we revised back our 2020 estimate. It changed by about 1,200 people. So as a note, when you're looking on our website for our data, keep in mind that we vintage our data. Each year we are revising backwards. So something that you perhaps downloaded from our website earlier this year will have a 2020 population number, but if you download the same file now, that 2020 number will be different. So just a reminder that when you are using data from our website, please keep in mind all the data sets should be labeled with what vintage they are. And so keep in mind those will change over time. So looking back to 2011, we see the annual growth in population in Colorado over the past 11 years. And on this chart, it's easy to see that 2021 had the lowest of that time period. In fact, the population gain in 2021 was the lowest since 1990. We had been averaging almost 70,000 people additionally per year since 2011. And again, this year from 20 to 21 was about 30,000 people. As we've been saying in all of our presentation, growth has been slowing, and this illustrates it completely. Growth has been slowing. Looking at those components of change, those three things that make up a population, births, deaths, and migration, these are illustrated on this chart. It goes back to the year 1991, forward 30 years to 2021. The blue line is showing births. And in the time period between July 2020 and 21, there were almost 62,000 births in the state of Colorado. Deaths still are showing an uptick, an increased rate due to the pandemic, and we had about 46,500 deaths in the state, the highest number that Colorado had ever seen. Net migration, though, especially compared to previous years, has declined greatly in this past 1 year period. It's been the lowest since about 2003 or 2004, with about 15,500 net migrants. So all told, that comes up to our 30,000 additional people in the state. Now this migration, we often look to see from census data, where are people from Colorado moving to, and where are people from other states moving to Colorado? This chart is from last year, because as you'll hear later on today, the 2020 American Community Survey had some issues and not all the data has been released. You'll hear more about that this afternoon. So looking back at 2019, because often these migration patterns are very similar year over year. But where Colorado got its most migrants from was California, Texas, Illinois. And people from Colorado had been moving to Utah and also, though, to Texas, California, and these large states. It's that net migration that is what matters. And so California, Texas, and Illinois had the largest net migration. So this is one source of migration data, state to state. Another source is from IRS data. And again, later this afternoon, you will see a demonstration of this new map that we have on our website, which is using Internal Revenue Service data on net individuals moving state to state. Again, in this map of the United States, you'll see those states shaded in blue representing where there was more net migration out of Colorado, and those states shaded in red, orange, or yellow where people were moving net more into Colorado. So again, California, Illinois, New York had most in-migrants from those states. And out-migration to Arizona, Utah, Washington, places in the West and South. But again, this application will be available on our website, and we'll hear more about that later this afternoon. So looking at 30,500 people that increase in Colorado over time. Where did it occur within the state? We're looking at a map of 64 counties in this state and where that total population change occurred. Counties shaded in red, orange, and yellow had an increase in population, while those shaded in blue had a decrease. Now, if you've been to any of our presentations before, you're probably familiar with this type of map. And the thing that pops out to me the most is, why are there population decreases in Metro Denver counties? You'll note that Denver, Jefferson County, and Boulder County had decreased population over this one-year time period. And typically, when you look at a map of the counties in Colorado for population gain, every county on the Front Range is showing gains. And now there are decreases. We will hear more about that later on, but we also see increases in much of the Western Slope and the Central Mountains, but also along the Front Range. Weld County, Douglas County, El Paso County, Pueblo, and Larimer saw increases in population. Now let's break this out by the components of change. First, we're looking at natural increase, literally births minus deaths. About 51% of the population change during this one-year period was because of natural increase. And here we see somewhat more similar patterns where most of the counties on the Front Range showed increases, including Denver, but definitely Weld, Douglas, El Paso. Many of the counties on the Eastern Plains and South Central Colorado had natural decrease, not nearly in the same magnitude of the increase in the Front Range, but decrease nonetheless. And that has been a bit more within the trends of the past few years. Net migration is the other component of change. And the net migration to the state accounted for about 49% of the population change during this time period. And here we see some interesting things. Many of the Metro Denver counties were showing net out migration, decrease in their population because of people moving out. Not Weld, not Douglas, not El Paso, but Boulder, Jefferson, Denver, and even Adams and Arapahoe County saw net out migration, according to the data we have received. So where does this leave us? Where are our rankings? What was the largest and the highest and the fastest? In terms of population growth for this one-year time period, Douglas County had the largest population change with over 9,000 people, followed by Weld at about 8,800, then El Paso, followed by Larimer and Adams County. Those were the counties in the state that gained the most population during this one-year time period. In terms of that percentage change, Custer, Mineral, San Juan, Ouray, and Elbert County saw the fastest change in their population. But the largest counties by far remained the largest counties. The top 12 counties in the state, starting with El Paso, followed by Denver, those have remained mostly the same. The same large counties are still the top 12 now. But what does this look like for the regions of the state? We know that things vary greatly by county, but there's some trends by region. So in this table, we're going to start with the Eastern Plains. We're going to go from east to west across the state. The Eastern Plains region is about 16 counties, and they had a positive population change overall. And all of it came from net migration, more people moving in than moving out. Next, moving east to west, the Front Range, those 12 counties from Larimer and Weld in the north, down through Metro Denver, through Colorado Springs to Pueblo. They did increase, but mostly by natural increase, births over deaths, rather than net migration. Moving west, we go to the Central Mountains, these counties that are tucked between the Front Range and the Western Slope. And again, they saw a large for this year, 1.6% increase. And much of that, all of that was actually due to net migration. Dip south to the South Central, the San Luis Valley. Those 6 counties saw a percentage change of about 1%, still higher than the state as a whole, with the mostly fueled by net migration. And finally, the western slope, the 21 counties on the whole western side of the state. They definitely saw their population change due to net migration and some by natural increase. So that's at the county level. And we receive our data on births, deaths, and migration at the county level. But we also produce municipal estimates. So to do so, we take the county population and distribute it to the different municipalities and the unincorporated parts of the county. The municipal estimates are always controlled to sum to the county level. And again, like with the county estimates, they are revised back to each decennial year. The housing units, this is where I collect housing unit data from all the cities, towns, and unincorporated areas in the state and use that data along with some other sources to distribute the population based on where the housing units are within a county. And as a side note, in the next few weeks, I will be starting to request housing data from all the local jurisdictions in the state. I think it's one of my most fun tasks of the year because I get to interact with representatives from all the counties and cities in the state to find out what's going on in your community, to get your housing data so that next year's estimates will be even better. So in terms of municipalities, knowing that the municipality populations within a county have to sum to the county who were the fastest growers. Well, it would make sense that those municipalities in counties that had population growth are the ones that grew. So we know El Paso County grew. Therefore, Colorado Springs had the largest population change of any municipality in the state at over 4,400, followed by Castle Rock, which is in Douglas County, also another county that had large gains. The city of Aurora was the third largest with about 2,400 additional people over this 1 year. And Aurora, for interest's sake, is in 3 different counties, followed by Windsor, which is in Larimer and Weld County. Both Larimer and Weld saw increases in their total population. The other counties in the top 10, the other municipalities in the top 10, Commerce City, Parker, Severance, Grand Junction, Castle Pines, and Lone Tree. Many of them are in Douglas County or Weld County, but definitely all in counties that saw that net increase. In terms of percentage change, the chart on the right side of the screen, we see similar trends. Many of these municipalities were in Weld County, which we know grew, and one crossed over, one's from Douglas. But for our top 10 for percentage change, with a 36% change year over year, Keensburg in Weld County, followed by Elizabeth in Elbert County, Severance in Weld County, Concha Springs in Chaffee County at 15.8%, followed by also Deer Trail, Alt, Gypsum, Castle Pines, Meade, and Wiggins. We have noted that typically large places get larger, be it a county, be it a municipality, and smaller places have been getting smaller, but not this year. That trend didn't quite hold. When we're looking at population by the size of municipalities, so if we're looking at all the cities or towns with a population of 100,000 or more, and there are 12 of them in the state, over this 1 year period, they actually lost population. And much of that has to do with the city of Denver, city and county of Denver, showing a population loss. But for this time period, the size group of cities that had the largest increase were those that were between 5,000 and 10,000 people in size. And there are 28 of those throughout the state. But overall, of the 272 municipalities in the state, 71% have fewer than 5,000 people. And when we look at just the 12 largest cities in the state, they contain 63% of the population in incorporated places. So overall, what are these trends? Oh, and I have something to add. I think it is interesting to note that we talk about municipalities, those incorporated places, but unincorporated parts of counties are also governed by a government, that county. And I wanted to note that in terms of population change, even though we're only looking, we'll go back to this slide, at municipalities, 2 unincorporated areas show up in the top 10 in terms of their overall population change. Unincorporated Douglas County gained 1,960 people, which would have ranked it 4th in this list of municipalities. And unincorporated El Paso County gained over 1,700 people, which would have ranked it 6th. So we talk about the cities, but unincorporated parts of the county also are growing. So when we look at the summary of these things, overall, it's the population in the municipalities are growing a little bit faster than the unincorporated areas. Municipalities contain about 74 and almost 75% of the population within the state, and unincorporated areas about 25%. And the rate of change was a bit faster for those municipalities than the unincorporated. In terms of the municipalities that had declining population for this 1-year time period, there were 91, and 42 of them had populations under 1,000, which is something that has been on trend for the past several years. But 5 municipalities had populations over 100,000, and they lost population during this 1-year time period. And all 5 of those were in the 7-county metro Denver area. So what role does housing play in this? A lot. But what you are seeing on the screen is what made me think of 40 years ago. This is the 40th state annual meeting. And I was thinking, what was I doing 40 years ago? And I was thinking, this is the type of housing. What you're seeing here is a circa 1980s Fisher Price Little People house. And in honor of our 40th anniversary, I was thinking, what was I doing 40 years ago? Well, actually, we didn't have this house when I was a kid, but this is what I was concerned with. So as a tribute to the 40th anniversary, I'm looking back. But let's move on. Housing data. I've talked about how we use housing data to distribute the population within a county to all the municipalities. And we have several sources of housing data. One is from the US Census Bureau. It's the Building Permit Survey. And they collect building permit data from most jurisdictions, and we can see what those are for Colorado. They collect it also by type or units and structure, so single family and multifamily. We have to keep in mind with this data, though, that not every permit that is issued goes through to completion. And building permits take time to complete. And even though there may be a certain number started in 1 year, we don't know when exactly those have been completed. We make some assumptions, but we're learning with the increase in multifamily dwelling units that those take longer to complete. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, another source of our housing data is the data I collect from all the municipalities in unincorporated counties in the state. I use that. We collect building permits and certificates of occupancy where available to understand where the growth in housing has occurred in different parts of the state. The Population Estimates branch of the US Census Bureau also uses the building permit survey data and some of our input based on what I have received from our local jurisdictions. But the decennial census does count housing units, and we can get information on tenure, renting and owning, and also the occupancy, vacancy, or occupied units. But in terms of characteristics, anything about the housing unit or about the household within the housing unit, we rely on the American Community Survey for information about that. So looking at the building permit survey data from the US Census Bureau, we have a time series back to 1994 for Colorado as a whole, and we're looking at the number of building permits issued for new residential units based on whether they are 1 unit, so a single family house, which is in blue, or 2 or more units, essentially multifamily in orange. And through the 90s and the early 2000s, they were averaging almost 40,000 permits per year. And then the Great Recession. and it dipped down considerably. In 2009, there were less than 10,000 permits issued. And since 2009 and 2010, the number of permits issued for new residential units in Colorado has been increasing. And we're just starting to get back to the level that we were at in the mid-2000s. For the year 2022, for September year to date, you can see on the far right that already Colorado has issued about 40,000 permits. So we anticipate that for October, November, and December to be a little bit higher. But we can see already that we have issued as many permits in 2022 as we did in 2020. So part of why we bring this up, we're looking at population and we put our estimates together based on the population. But we also use the housing units to distribute it among the counties. But we have noted throughout almost the entire, well, not the entire history of Colorado, but for the past 30 years, when population increases in the state and when housing units are built, doesn't always match well. What you're seeing in this chart are the blue bars are indicating the number of new housing units completed in a given year. And again, as we noted before, because it sort of matches the permits, we saw the largest number of these in the mid to late 90s through the mid 2000s. Then the Great Recession, and we were completing very, very few housing units. But we have started to tick back up, and again, averaging nearly 40,000 completions a year. But the red line is showing the household population, and it's not matching exactly the housing units. And of course, they wouldn't. But we wonder that with the housing constraints we see in Colorado today, what role did the slow levels of building play during 2009, 10, 11, through about 2016? That population was still increasing in the state, and yet there were not housing units being built. We have this mismatch, and this is it's an interesting thing to think about when we're looking at population, because in this 20 to 21, we had many new housing units built, more than we had in population change. So it's sort of uncertain as to, if we built all these housing units, why isn't there more population? And what we've noticed is these things don't always match. Over time, we've looked at the ratio between housing units and households, going back to 1985 at the top bar of this chart, down to 2021. And we don't pretend to know what the best optimal ratio is between the number of households and housing units. We basically know we want more housing units than households, but it has fluctuated over time. And we're coming out of a very low ratio in 2016, and we're slowly moving up. So it may be an indication of what is to come for housing units and population in the state. So to recap everything about that year of 2020 to 2021, population in the state as a whole increased 0.5%, and it's the slowest year-over-year growth since 1989. Because we saw a significant reduction in net migration. The population change within Colorado did deviate from trends of the last decade. 74% of the growth in this one-year time period was in Front Range counties. But over the past decade, 95% of the growth was in the Front Range counties. So definitely a slowing there. 21 counties had decreases in population, but including 3, Denver, Jefferson, and Boulder, that had not had a decrease in their population for over 16 years. The municipal population did increase a little bit faster than the overall state average, but 91 municipalities had population decreases. But by far, the municipalities grow faster than the unincorporated areas. Housing stock. It's important for calculating our municipal estimates, but the change in housing units just does not always match the change in population. Because in this one-year time period, we saw a 1.7% increase in housing stock, but the population only increased 0.5%. So this mismatch, but we value all the input we get from our local governments on their housing stock and their changes in housing. So that concludes estimates, and I will turn it back over to Elizabeth.